All right, we're gonna check this one out. See if I can see that chat box. Mm. Let's see here. No, that's the other one. Weird. Oh, say something. There's the chat box. Yeah, now I see it. All right. All right. So this one's working. If people can find it. Mm. Mhm.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah.
How'd you do it?
The selection for like who can see it or whatever has to be not made for kids. I think they turn it off for made for kids, which is weird because when I used to load videos and they added that option, whenever I selected not made for kids, it treated every guitar video that I tried to put up as like an adult video that was restricted. And so I would always select made for kids so that I could get it published. But on this, it's the exact opposite. If you say it's made for kids, then it doesn't allow the chat box, which I don't understand why. It doesn't explicitly say that. I don't know. I have one person online. So the chat box works, so any questions can go in the chat box, and I can interact with the chat box. Can you give me that tuner there? There's a tuner right there. Yeah, but it works. It's just that the thing broke when I use it. Yeah, since we got off to a late start, whoever's watching, we'll wait a few minutes till once I get some questions and start teaching stuff. Okay, cool. Yeah, I can read that. So I have Dave Tram on. So whoever starts asking questions and I start teaching something, we'll count that as 0 timeline. Then I'll go for the hour or however long you want me to go. Just trying to get my A440. Cool. So I'm ready to go. I'm not sure what you guys want to do in terms of interactive. I'd prefer if I can address specific questions about anything, because I'm not sure what my audience is in terms of level and things like that. So, if I just start teaching beginner level stuff, then some of you guys get bored. And if I just do stuff that's crazy advanced, it might be you're just watching me play. So if you want to ask anything specific to address, even if it's just a song form by name, I can start with that. So as soon as I see something pop up specific to teach, we'll get right into it. right, so show some basic techniques with the solea. Okay, so we'll start with the most basic, which is just basic strumming. So I like to use the when you go to a flamenco dance class, the first thing you do is have to play something for them to warm up. And the typical thing they want is the solea, escovilla chord structure. And what we do for that really are two things. There's a falsetto, is real simple, using arpeggio, and there's just basic strumming of chords. And so I think the basic strumming of chords is the best thing to learn first, because you really get just a handle on what's the solea really about in terms of its structure. It's just a couple of cadential chords that you have to strum over and over. But because it's so repetitive, you can really focus your attention not on left hand, obviously, but on the right hand rhythm stuff, right? So let me show you the chords first. We're just using an F major, but we put the ninth up there, the G. And then we go to C major, and then we do another F. Now on the third F, we can change things around a little bit. So what I like to do for the beginning students is just have a regular F where you do a half bar with F and C, but you open it up to F major 7, but let the E ring, the top string, on the second beat, and on the third beat, you put it back on, and then the last measure, you do E major. So with that simple chord progression, we can start looking at compas, right hand technique, strumming, things like that. So it's in 3, but the way we're going to divide the beat is the typical escovilla when solea is very slow tempo. And by very slow, I mean like 60 beats a minute, that kind of thing. So with a quarter note. So we're going to use the subdivision of 16th notes, or 4 strokes per beat, to do this rhythm. So to do that, we're going to use the index finger. And when you're strumming, you want to just keep your thumb kind of relaxed but resting on the 6th string. So you're just going to do 4 notes per beat. So 1, 2, 3, and on the third beat you can stop. So you do 8th notes. So like 1, and 2, and 3, and then we're going to change the chord on the end of 3. So again, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Beat 2 is the major 7, and then back on for the third beat, and then the E chord. 1, 2, 3, okay? What would I recommend for beginners to get started in flamenco? Again, this kind of thing, basic compas strumming chords, make sure you have these basic kind of chords already. Now, in this example, we're not using any bar chords or anything. So as a beginner, we don't have to worry about the technique of playing a bar chord yet. But it is a challenge for beginners to simply move one chord to another and keep the rhythm. And what I've done in the past with beginning students, in fact, I used to just avoid teaching students that couldn't do that, because it's a big obstacle to get over for beginners. And one thing I would do is just have them use the metronome, and just a basic clicking metronome. I know a lot of people think about the fancy compas metronomes that express accents and subdivision and all that stuff. But just something that basically clicks like this. And if you put it at 60, which is like 1 click per second, basically, this is 60. And you just have something like that going. And if you're a beginner and you're having trouble just moving chords around, what you do is you just work on moving one chord to the other, and let the metronome tell you when it's time to change. So you can start moving your fingers early, in other words, in hopes to land on the beat. So if you count to 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now that one is when you got to change on each click. That one's a little easier because you're only doing this. So it's pretty easy to get that on each click. So you go 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. And by doing that, hopefully you get your left hand, if you're a beginner, to move the chords in time. And you will notice that if you're more advanced, you say, well, hold on, you're not actually holding the chord for a full 3 beats. Sometimes 1, 2, 3, I'm already moving. And then 1, 2, 3, I'm already moving 1. And the reason I'm moving early is so, if you're a beginner, especially, you want to move a little early so that you get all your fingers in place right for the downbeat, so you're not late. And in all honesty, if you're more advanced as a musician, you think, well, I need to hold that full dotted half note measure of a chord. It's not really true even in practice. When we actually play in a more advanced way in flamenco guitar, we're always allowing open strings to ring. So for example, if I played that whole sequence very fast, I don't care that I didn't hold each one of those chords complete 16th note value at the last beat into the next chord. I'm already moving, and my hand is strumming open strings, and that's actually okay. It's like part of the flamenco sound. Now you can exaggerate that to a degree where it just doesn't sound good, like something like this: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. But if you're actually keeping the rhythm, it doesn't even sound that bad, and it depends what key you're playing in. So you'll also discover, as you get even more advanced than beginner level, that the keys that we play in, regardless of how advanced the music might be, tend to have something where the open strings are available in some form. And that's actually a big part of the characteristic sound of the guitar, is the open strings themselves relative to whatever you're playing. So, you might see something that seems very complicated, like the taranta. But the thing is that the characteristic sound of it is the fact that you just got to get these open strings relative to what you're actually fretting, right? And other pieces like minera, you get these open strings that sound a little dissonant sometimes. But the truth is that gives the flavor of that actual key. Whereas if you were on a piano, you just transpose, nothing changes really. So if you were a piano player and you wanted to get more of a guitaristic sound, and there's a couple gypsy guys that play flamenco piano that do this deliberately, they really attack those notes that are these ones and let them be heard as dissonance to get the flavor, because the open strings are literally part of the sound of the guitar. And when we're trying to keep the rhythm going, it's totally okay to let these open strings come. What's not okay is to kind of slow down to get the chord, which is what a lot of beginners do. And as they get more advanced, they just carry that little hiccup of rhythm along with them. And you don't want to do that. You want to do, especially in the beginning, is get this hand going like a machine. And don't worry that you hit an open string or whatever. Your left hand will eventually learn how to go faster and be able to move these chords, right? So back to the soleá, we're going to just do this strumming pattern, and I'll go through a couple of rasgueados, so as you go from the beginner level to more advanced, you can still have fun with this basic chord progression, right? So you're doing basic 16th notes, but you want to maybe emphasize the beat with golpe. So right off the bat, that is a huge, again, for beginners, this is a huge obstacle. And if you're more advanced, you can do this. You might struggle with students that can't do it for some reason. They can't do this, hitting the golpe with the ring finger and the index at the same time. Sometimes you can hit with other fingers too, as long as you don't make a flam. Well, let's call it like a flam when you have more than one finger. But if your fingers are all hitting at once and you use like all these fingers, it's fine. Pinky even can get involved, or middle finger. But what you want to do is you have that stroke opposite the ring finger, and so you're thinking about like this motion. Now, this motion is pretty easy for people to do, but when they're actually playing guitar, their brain gets in the way, and they're like, they can't do both at the same time. And they think that it's just like an amazing feat of coordination to do that. And it's not really. It seems like it at first, but the way I teach students to get over this hurdle is to do the golpe without the stroke and do the other 3 16th notes. So in other words, 1 E and 2 E and 3, right? So the beat has the golpe by itself, and the finger fills in the 16th note gaps, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, and you can just do it like an exercise. This is obviously kind of a boring rhythm, but as an exercise, it's really good to get the golpe. So then, after you can do that at tempo, So you don't want to do this like just slow all the time because you don't feel it the right way. So it's got to be kind of fast. Once you can do it at tempo, and your student can do it at tempo, or if you're the beginning student, you're yourself, you feel pretty confident that you can do this. Then what you're going to do, you do with your eyes, is you'll look at your hand, and whenever you do those golpes, you notice that your index finger does this. It jumps over the string. It literally steps over rather than touch the string like it does on the other 16th note, like 1 E and like there. It just touches and sweeps across, and then it deliberately jumps over the string when you do this. But this motion, in order to get under the string here, that's exactly the motion you want. You just want to touch the string. So you just let your finger dip down as you're doing this, and you can do it with your eyes and just will it to go towards the strings closer and closer until all of a sudden they're simultaneously happening. Anyway, this usually works for my beginner students. Is that they practice that for a week or so, and they're like, oh, okay, I got it now. But you don't want to do it like just do this all day long. It just, it doesn't. They get stuck with the coordinating the two things, and it's not really like that complicated. It's really just get into the groove of the rhythm and then let it happen naturally. And once you can do it and you first learn how to do it, you feel like you want to do it on every beat, because you realize how easy it is to do. But anyway, for our soleá, back to the soleá, you want to put these golpes on each beat. So you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? And again, like I showed the very first phrase, you stop on the third beat and put an eighth note. So it's half the speed of the strumming, right? So 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1. So even though we have very clear defined downbeats on 1, we notice that our third beats get emphasized simply by stopping the rhythm there. It's like something happens with the timing that we're by stopping the rhythm or making it an eighth note, it gets emphasized. In other words, even though I'm not literally doing anything like what you would call an accent, I'm not actually accenting it, but by the very nature of stopping and making an eighth note, it is getting accented somehow. Right? It seems like the purpose was that third beat to stop. Okay, so every beat that way is kind of marked or accented, but you can accent in other ways than just the golpe, and that's with basic rasgueado. Rasgueado, just fanning the fingers out. And when you first do this, you don't want to do anything fancy like flicking the fingers and do all that stuff. You just fan them out, and it could be pinky, all the fingers, whatever fingers you want to use. But you want to go in this sequence. There's some people that learn it backwards, but and there's a problem with doing it backwards, and it's really simple. The problem is that if you do it backwards, you can't do the golpe. And so when you hear people do it backwards, that's what's missing is golpe accent. In other words, they can't go if they needed to. But anyway, you're going to just use pinky to start off. And we don't have to golpe. Later you realize you can do that also. But the idea here is the rasgueado is going to take place of the golpe. So let's do it on beat 1. Beat 1's easier because it's like downbeat, so it makes more sense. You want the index finger landing on the downbeat, so you think of it as like a grace note before the beat. So like beat 3 came like 3 E and A1, right? 3 E and A1. So it's like A1, 2, 3, and A1, 2, 3, and A1, 2, 3, and A1. And I find most people get a handle on this, and assuming they can play with the click here, this is 60. Maybe that's a little slow, for the basic feel. Maybe 70 is better, right? 70, something like that. Right? So you use the metronome around 70, maybe a little faster, but. Okay, so once you got that, you realize by using the downbeat as a place to emphasize this. You're gathering up your fingers on the before, and you realize, oh, when I do that 3 and 1, right? It gives you time to prepare. And time is what this is all about, really. So when we decide that we want to accent a different beat than beat 1, if you want to put the rasgueado on beat 3, then you have to prepare it early. So you got to gather it up and get it in there before beat 3. So what has to happen is we're eating into beat 2 when we do that. So you go 1, 2, E, and. So that's only 3 strokes, 2, E, and then I have to gather my hand up so we're on time to do the same rasgueado, but landed on 3. 3 and 1, 2, E, and a 3, right? So it's like 2, E, and a 3, right? So you have to do it that way or the time goes off, right? So you start becoming aware of like when my finger is going up and down, and it's like for the timing of this thing, and this will translate even as you get much more advanced. It's a real simple concept. It's like a bouncing ball. There's the downstroke and the upstroke, or the downbeat and the upbeat. And so you're usually playing around with one or the other. You've got to be aware of where that ball is, if it's down on the ground, if it's up in the air, in order to keep it dribbling, right? So this is like dribbling a ball. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, right? Right? So that's a simple way to get the concept. So then we can start doing more specific type rasgueado. So instead of just randomly throwing it out there, we can start doing more specific stroke patterns, right? So one of the first ones I like to show is just using 3 fingers. So you have this kind of 3-note jab or like a gallop, this thing. Right? And you hear that da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. That's very much like 30-second note divisions, but you don't want to have to think that complicated about it. That's what's happening. And as you know, 30-second notes double the 16ths. So again, we stick to this stroke right in the same spot that we just did this kind of more vague concept of timing in a more specific way. So instead of brah, it's like da da da. So it's a very different idea, but we're basically doing the same thing on that last beat of the second, the last 16th note of the second beat, right? So you have a 1 E and a 2 E and da da da, right? And that gets you to beat 3. 1, 2 E and da da da. Okay. Now, if you have trouble with that and you still sound like mushy or whatever, you can just drill this for a while, maybe with muted strings to make sure you hear that kind of galloping sound, right? So if I wanted to add to this rasgueado and make it a little more interesting, again, we start adding notes to the stroke. We can do the upstroke. Now that by itself is a good thing to practice, but I usually introduce this when we need it more specifically in other palos. So for now, I just want to show what I call a 5-stroke. So what you do is you do the 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, but then we do the 5th note, which is going to be our accented beat. Okay, so that means we have 4 notes and then the beat that we want to accent, which is count 3 when we're going from one chord to the next. So 1 E and a 2 E and a 3. Okay, you hear the 5 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in order to make that work, now I'm backing it up a little in the beat, like in beat 2. So it's actually, when I get to beat 2, I can only do 2/16. I can only go 1 E and a 2 E. That's it. That's all I get. And then I'm delivering this 5-stroke attack or roll. So if you get used to that, going from beat 2 to beat 3, just doing this, that starts setting you up, your hand, for the feel of a lot of different flamenco forms later. That's going to be really easy once you can do this in basic soleá, is to just get the feel for how your rasgueados fit in between the beats, and you use them to emphasize whatever beat you want to accentuate. In this case, we keep accentuating beat 3. As you saw earlier, I started accenting beat 1. And a lot of people think there's got to be this hard line rule that you can only accent count 3 and count 6, 8, 10, whatever. And you realize that phrasing is more of an emergent property of these kind of things, these little rhythmical exercises of how the hand deals with subdivision and in between beats and extending different beats. So that particular pattern is one that is important. However, it's not the only one you can do and still be expressing the compas correctly, right? So again, to continue on, you can go through the whole cycle this way. Now you notice when I do the chord that changes the note, this is where some people get confused because they're not sure what the left hand should do. The idea is like you can keep the left hand doing whatever it was doing before. So don't worry about what it's doing that specifically. But if you want to really know what's happening, it should be like this. Literally, that's what happens. Da, 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 da. If you don't think about it, that's what happens. If you do want to think about it, or it's bothering you that you can't get this to happen, then what you can do is just deliberately do something. It could be leave it open or leave it closed. If you leave it open, it would be like this. Something like that. Or if you close it early, sorry. So you literally have this. Da, 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 da. Then you have something maybe more deliberate and exacting that you can repeat over and over. So every time. And what it really meant was that this major 7 is a nice chord. You only hear it for 2 notes. That's it, and then back on. Right. These little details later on just become your taste, and you can always mess around with this chord. Some people do this chord instead, which is nice, D minor inverted, or they'll do something like this cool chord, which is augmented 6 chord here with the D sharp. So that's like what I call a 5-stroke, even though some people confuse it for literally like 5 notes per beat. It's not. It's still divided by 4s, like 30-second notes. But I just, for students, it's simple to count how many strokes they're doing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. So if I added another 16th note back in time to make a longer rasgueado, we actually have a 7-stroke. So that would be like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now this is a little hard for people to do the golpe, but the really problematic thing with this is, unlike the 5-stroke where we do this and our fingers are kind of remain like this open, you can do the golpe. It's pretty easy to do this. This is a lot harder because when you come up, you have to get all these guys up at the same time, or maybe a little earlier, to repeat the ring finger and not be out of rhythm. So most students end up doing this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, which is not even, right? So in order to clean up that evenness, there's actually a whole nother technique for this rasgueado, and that would be to do this, to start like this with this finger. So if I have students that are doing pretty good with the soleá already, I might have already gone to another flamenco song form, something like tangos or sevillanas or something like that, where we use this other stroke. So let me show this with sevillanas, let's say, because it's a real easy kind of rhythm to do. What you want to do, just for the technique itself, is just kind of start like this, where your finger's pointing, and you come up, and then right away your ring finger comes down. Because it's already set up, it's a little bit easier for people to get this, and the ring finger coming down right away. But what you want it to sound like is 4 even notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Start again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So the reason I said sevillanas is because this strum, and you can do this for fandango, sevillanas, tangos, a lot of things that have that medium tempo galloping rhythm, is that you can use this as a repetitive gallop to express the basic compás pattern. And it's important to do it this way because of the sound of the strings in the chord. So really quick, I'll show the chords for sevillanas would be E and A minor. Okay. So what I like to do for students, because it's a little bit weird to change the chords this way, is do actually 2 different type of chords for the E. So you do like a basic E7, which is this. on the second beat, you put the pinky down on the D, and that way you hear this kind of little melodic line going on the B string. Right, so then you hear 3 clear beats, like 1, 2, 3, and that I think people latch onto a little better than just counting, right? So the melody is giving them the rhythm; they don't have to count it, right? So 1, 2, 3. So when we're changing those chords like that, and that's all you have to do. That's it, and you stay here. So with the left hand being basically that simple, you can look at the right hand pattern. So the right hand pattern is, again, hopefully, you've learned this already from the Soleá or just practicing this, right? That you learned how to do the golpe, right? Because this is important too, because you need to express this with the Sevillana or the Fandango, same kind of thing. So on the downbeat here, or the first beat, you're gonna use the golpe. And then you're gonna do this stroke, the one I just showed you. So you're gonna keep your finger here, but this is where you move that note. So this is like your second beat or second chord. And when you do this rhythm, again, it's 4 even notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice I'm not like flicking or anything like that. It's just the same as this. It's just that I'm starting with the upstroke of the index. Right, and a lot of students start again like bom, ba, ba, bom, bom, ba, ba, bom, and you want to make it clear that if you're beginning this, that you do it even, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as you get more advanced with it, you don't have to do this where you're setting up like this. It's just very helpful in the beginning to understand that to be prepared for that second note to come out, with your ring finger right away. And if you're good enough with it, you realize you can almost do it simultaneously, not unlike this, that you can go. It's like that's how fast you could actually do any rasgueado, is like almost on top of itself. See that? That's almost at the same moment. So that's infinity speed. So if you just do, you don't have to go infinity speed. You just need to do kind of a triplet subdivision. Right? So as fast as you can do this, and as fast as you can do this, you can do any rasgueado that fast, right? As fast as you want. So just as an example, if I were to make it a continuing roll, we're not going to do this in Sevillanas now, but you can eventually do a continuing roll like this, where you start 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? You can go very fast with it. Because you learned this is the reset action for the second note. You don't have a speed limit with this thing, right? But in the beginning, everybody's got this concept in their mind that there's separate strokes, and there'll always be a hiccup here, right? And there doesn't need to be. There's no need for it. So this is the best solution I've found for this problem. And the other weird thing for me is I see a lot of people just not even doing this rasgueado at all, which is strange to me, because any other rasgueado that you try to do here sounds a lot different. So like, for example, let's do the Sevillanas so you see. So we start with a golpe, E7, put this guy down for the second beat, do the stroke, and then you go to A minor. Okay, and you notice that each chord change is a little ahead of the beat, so that you can do it while you're doing the rasgueado. 1, 2, 3, and, right? So to just keep it in Sevillanas or in 3, on the third beat, you just do an and. It's not very unsimilar than the Soleax. It's much faster, right? 1, 2, 3, and then you do the same thing on the A minor without changing anything. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and. So if you just repeat that, that's basically Sevillanas. Very slow. And, again, the reason for starting with that upstroke is because it attacks only really the treble part of the chord. And as you keep strumming that thing, so like this is darker because it's hitting the bass notes, or like you can flick that if you want, but if you don't flick it, it sounds more like this. Flicking's a little darker. But as soon as you do this, it's very bright because you start it with the upstroke. right? And then you get more of a full sound by the other fingers coming through, right? When you go fast, it just sounds like a full chord, but it's not really. It's hitting the trebles first. And when you focus your ear on those trebles, you realize that that bright sound keeps the rhythm kind of alive. It's like, again, like that bouncing ball. That upper part of the rhythm, the upper position, is always that open string sound. If you do a different rasgueado for that, for sevillanas, if you're doing downstrokes like this, it doesn't have the same brightness because you're not attacking those trebles, right? It's very different because of that sound. And then there's a saying, so you might have learned this if you're more advanced. You probably learned you can do the same kind of thing without the middle finger and have this, which is more of a galloping sound. And you realize when you're doing this correctly, a similar idea is that you're attacking first the treble. The ring finger is alone, kind of by itself here, not really strong attack, but it's okay. It doesn't have to be dynamically as equal as the other ones. It can be softer. And what it's doing is getting the middle part of the chord voicing, the strings, and then this index finger, especially if you bend your thumb like this and flick it, like a lot of people learn that and they just do that for everything all the time, but you don't have to do that all the time. But in this case, if you do that, it's just attacking the basses. So it would be as if you played with a pick that you're doing. And if you listen to it really close, that's exactly what's happening every time you do this technique. And that's the point of the technique. It gives that sound to the chord, the voicing. And again, you keep hearing this, the bright part of the chord, give this up, when you're bouncing the ball, the up feel. Right, that's sevillanas. If you want to do fandango, it's the same thing. It's just that on the second pass, instead of doing that again, you do, right, you go down the scale. G, F, E. You don't have to do a bar chord. And this is different too, abanico, but you can do this if you want. Or with this. Sorry, I'm getting a call. There we go. So this is with the middle finger included. And then this is without the middle finger. Right, so a little different. I would tend to use the stroke with the middle finger involved at the more slow and medium tempos. And if you have a much faster tempo, like sevillanas typically is faster than fandango, you would do the two finger one. It's just more comfortable and it still sounds full, but if you do that one on the slower tempo versus this, you can see at the slower tempo why filling it in more sounds better, right? So assuming that you worked on this too, and so now we're moving along pretty fast. If you're able to do this basic strum, which is, I say basic, and I admit it's hard for people to get this, but most people can do it when they apply this simple concept of preparing it like this and just doing it, right? And you don't always have to be doing left hand. You can just do this with the metronome, mute the strings, and try to hear that triplet sound, right? And another thing to practice at the same time, so you keep it kind of even all together, is the other basic thing, right? This, or that we did in the Soleá, this one, right? But you can just do the triplet version, which is like just end up like this. So you hear that, again, it's 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in terms of timing, without a chord, it should sound the same as this one. soon as you apply that to a chord, you hear the difference. Those end on the treble sound, whereas these ones end on the bass. Right? So that's the idea of having the two different techniques rather than always doing one all the time. You actually have two different options that make the rhythm sound totally different, right? So with that in mind, let's say you can do that. Now we go back to what I call the 7 stroke, which would be this. This is one of my favorites, dude. Sorry. So this is 7 notes now. I'm basically doing this 1, 2, 3, 4. Here, as you see, you're connecting the two types of rasgados together right here. And the seam is this, again, that you've worked on, hopefully. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Right? So you have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is a nice even stroke. And if you realize what's happening, you got 6 and then the next beat. The idea of 6 is really an important mathematical concept because once you have 6, you realize you can do a lot of things with 6. You can make it 16th notes where you're doing like I'm doing in soleás, like starting on the and. So like 1 E and a 2 and a 3. 1 E and a 2 and a 3. Right? So I'm starting on the E, right? But doing this 7 stroke. You don't have to think about the divisions as much as just know how to start it and keep the rhythm. So you start off to B2, here's B2, then I throw in the 7 stroke, and it lands on 3. 1, 2, 3, 1. So without, those are, divisions of 4 really. But because the number is 6, you can use this kind of stroke for a lot of different things. So for example, something totally different like bulletias. That's actually the same stroke. I'm going 1. This is 7 stroke. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But the reason it sounds so different there is because they're really triplets in this situation. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So it's 6 notes, but they're triplet based. And that actual timing between the golpes is actually my golpe on 12. And then I have a golpe on 3. If you know bulletias already, you understand what I'm talking about. 12, 1, 2, 3. 12, 1, 2, 3. 12, 1, 2, 3. Right? So it's very different than this timing. But physically, it really feels similar. It almost feels like the same kind of thing. And it's not very difficult to adapt it to something completely different. It's just as long as you understand this already. Anyway, you get the idea. So back to the soleá. After a 7 stroke, well, you can go through the whole form again. This way. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. And these are things I would work out myself in dance class. It starts getting boring, repeating the same, over and over while they're warming up. And they want a lot of repetition, the dancers, because they keep working the feet the same way over and over and over to get the techniques, and they need that musical base to do that on, to do it over top of. So it gets boring pretty fast. So you got to start working out more and more interesting rasgados to keep this thing alive without, getting bored yourself. So right. So next will be what I call the 9 stroke, where we're going to start right on beat 2. And again, assuming you've got this down to 7, and you've already got your Sevillanas thing. So now we're just connecting a proper roll, connecting a full 2 times through a roll. 2, 3, like that, right? Or start on beat. We start on beat 2, but it's like double time, right? So 1, 2, 3, right? So one thing I didn't say or make super clear when we did the 5-stroke is we do the golpe. When we do the 7-stroke, it's hard to do the golpe because you don't have time to retract with that upstroke and prepare your ring finger to do this. So some people have trouble with. So it's basically this that you got to be able to do. If you can't do that, it's fine. Sometimes I let students skip the golpe on the 7s, but on the 9, you want to be able to do the golpe again, so that you should have been able to do with the 5. This is the 5 again, right? So that's how it's going to end when you add another round of it, right? So once, twice, you leave this guy out, and that's how you get a 9-stroke pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? And again, I say 9, 7, and 5 with the understanding that that last note is not the division, it's the downbeat that you're expressing or you're accenting. So it's like count 3 or whatever. So it's really like groups of 4, and then you hit the next beat, and that's why it sounds like an odd number. But I just think it's easier for students to understand how many strokes they're doing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then they get the concept. Oh, so 5 starts like this, 7 starts like this, and 9 starts right on the beat. So with those as a combination, you can start doing this pattern of soleá and just start improvising different combinations however you feel in the moment, so that you just feel when you do that golpe, you decide right there, do I do this? Do I do this? Or do I do this? And you just kind of make it up as you go. You can do, I mean, obviously, once you can do it. So if you want to just practice it, again, you can just keep expressing the 3rd beat like you were before. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? Or you can start switching accents, and you can do the same thing and accent beat 2, right? So like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, for example. Or you can switch it up. So you accent the 3rd beat the first 2 times. That would be, your 3 and your 6 if you count to 12. And then beat 2 the 2nd or the 3rd chord, and that would be your count 8. And then again at the end, you can do whatever you want on the last measure. And that's where you kind of see this thing manifest of the 12 count pattern by doing something like this. And then you change it. Right, or and you start making it up. Anyway, you get the idea. And all of a sudden, the boring dance class gets pretty interesting. So I wasn't paying attention to some of my questions here. You wanted to see the last 2 measures of fandango. Okay. And especially the last measure of fandango would be good for the see that beneath. Okay. So going back to the basic, when I was talking about sevillanas, if you make that a fandango, you just add this kind of other progression, right? So that part should be pretty simple to see what that is, like G or G7. And I'm doing 8th notes, like 1 and 2 and, right? So the end is with the index finger. Thumb, index, thumb, index. On the 3rd beat, I just play the 2 open strings, open E and the top E, right? 3 and then I have a downbeat accentuation, and that's where we're gonna just do a golpe without a chord, and we set up this fancy chord. This is like the E chord that we started with the 7th that we added, but I'm also putting the F in it, which is like an add 9. And a lot of people might recognize this if you're more advanced. This is a diminished chord, which exists inside of the E chord. So it's what they call dominant ninth, right? So it's with the flat 9 in there. So we're going to play that chord, and I did do, I wanted people just to get the basic Raschiato, which is this thing, which is fine. But whenever you got this bigger chord where you got 6 strings and your thumb is sitting here, you don't hear the 6th string, but you want to hear that string, right? So that's when we involve the wrist. For the sake of the voicing of the chord, we want to hear more notes. So that's where this comes into play, the abanico. So some people already learn abanico different ways. You know, there's this thing that a lot of people pick up online, and they like to use that for everything. And that's a very important strum because it's very loud. It sweeps across. If you already know this, great. But I try to get the students to learn this instead first, which is, it's harder to make it sound powerful for beginning students because it's conceptually seems harder to do. But I'm going to show you some tricks for learning this. This is called abanico, which means fan, like you're fanning yourself. So just to be clear, it's a triplet. Again, 4 notes, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And the way I'm doing it, though, is with the thumb, because I'm using my wrist as an upstroke, the ring finger, and then I'm not using my middle finger, but I'm using the index down, right? So it's thumb, ring, index. Now, some people look at this a completely separate thing from all other Raschiatos they've ever done, right? But the thing about it is that if you could do already this, okay, this thing is very similar to the abanico, believe it or not. It's just, what's really different about it is the upstroke we're not doing with our index, we're doing it with our thumb. So if you pretend like you're holding a guitar pick and instead do this, you see the index comes up there. And then in this position, or the up position, just like when you do this, the ring finger comes out. Notice when I do it as if without my thumb, my hand doesn't really do this to play the ring finger. But everybody wants to do that when they're using abanico because they think of it as, oh, I got to get this second stroke. And we don't want to do that with abanico. So the idea is that you're up in the air. I won't even use the chord, just do this, or just the strings. The idea is that the index finger is just coming out the same way it does here. And like I said before, this is not a very powerful sound. It doesn't have to be. The power comes from the wrist of the down up. With this chord already ringing, this is just creating that extra note. Just like when we do this. That ring is pretty weak sound. Don't worry about it being, everybody's like, they want to bang that note out, and there's no reason for it. It's literally an independent stroke, like that. So when you do it with the wrist, it's the same thing. Just the finger, no wrist on this. And then, as we did this before, obviously this is a different feeling because you flick. But what we're doing instead, this is where the heavy stroke comes with the wrist, which everybody should be able to do. Just this, you know. Like if you had a pick, you're just doing this. That's why it can be very powerful, but a lot of people don't realize that they have the control to make that power. And here's the trick for learning how to get it, you know, fast or whatever, because a lot of people do this very slow, and then they start very slow and they speed up and they hit a wall at a tempo that's way below what they want, you know. And that's because they're thinking these as individual strokes, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And when I do this, I don't feel that at all. I'll show you what I feel. This is what I feel. That's what I feel. And I think everybody can feel that, which is just down up stroke. Just throw your hand down and end up, right? So if you do that and repeat that, and just repeat it over and over, you see how loud that is and how powerful and easy to make a lot of noise with that is. Like I'm just going down with the index, but the thumb is along for the ride, and the thumb comes up. Even I might hit that board on the way up to get more punch there, right? So with the ring finger sneaking in there very quietly, watch this. sneaking in right before the index comes down, like leading the index on the way down. So the way you make it, now that's not a triplet, right? It's kind of a galloping sound. Just sneaking it in every once in a while. So that's not what we want. We want a triplet, right? So here's how you make it a triplet. It's real simple. You're just going to do your down up with a swing. But you have to be careful how you do this, because I have students come back after practice and they're swinging the wrong way. The way you want to swing is like this. And that's a pretty strong sound. If you got the swing right, you realize you're hanging up in the air longer, right? So right, you're hanging up here, not the opposite. So some people come back going, which is the exact opposite swing, right? You want to end up in the air and be holding up. Now you want that swing, you still want to feel your beat sense on the up stroke, right? Even though that's a down beat, right? So you got 1, 2, 3, da-da, 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 da-da. Make sure you can feel that your upstroke is on the beat. So here's your beat, 2, 3, 4. So in this up position is where the ring sneaks in and makes the triplet happen. Right? So when I come to the end of that fandango, it's very fast, but it's only because it's as fast as you need to do this. Right? It's that fast. So it's really about that, the wrist from this. That's why if you go very slow, you can't go any faster if you're thinking of each stroke individual. You have to release that feeling that it's 3 strokes and realize that it's really just 2 strokes. With the ring sneaking in there and making a little flam kind of. Okay. So that's the abanico, and it does take practice to get that, just like all this other stuff that you want to drill it. And the more often you use the metronome, the more often you're aware of where you're at, what your speed limits are. And, like I said, you do things slow, and then all of a sudden you realize there's a threshold that you have to cross, and then it feels different. And that's the thing. Like, some things are not supposed to be used at certain speeds, even though they don't feel right. That's why I like this. I like for the slower one, and this one for the faster. Not that you can't do both at different speeds, but it's what feels comfortable at a certain tempo range, right? Same thing with like I said, that 7-stroke thing. Sorry. I love that, the feel of that in the hand at that tempo. Maybe alegrías, I might use it. I just really like that one. And then bulerías. Completely different rhythm, but the feeling in the hand is very similar. It's almost the same. So that concept of the feel and things like that is really what it's about. And then as you develop, you have your own style, and that's just you learn what other people are doing or what the tradition does, and then you start to pick the things that you like, to do that are fun to do for you. So sometimes you realize that when you learn something note for note, you either decide, am I learning this piece because I want to learn how the techniques are in there, or am I really going to use this music for myself to express something? If you're going to take it and use it, you have to realize in those spots where you have basically compás or whatever, bookending falsetas or whatever, obviously a falseta is probably meant to be whatever it is, musically speaking. But when it comes to the rhythmic stuff, you can kind of adjust there. And, if you like what they're doing, you learn that, maybe you can use that for your own thing somewhere else. Or you can just, when you see those spots in the music, in between a falseta, you see compás, and they might be doing a different rasgueado than the one you like. Well, you're totally free to change that and do the ones that you've developed that you really feel comfortable and confident doing. I used to never do this thing because I didn't really learn it correctly. And so I was doing this like a lot of beginning intermediate players who play for dancers, whatever, they like doing this because it's very loud. But then I realized that it's a very limiting thing to do this technique for all of those triplets that you might want. Like if I did that fandango again, doing this all the time, I realized that if you think about dynamics, there's like mezzo piano, mezzo forte, and then fortissimo, right? So I look at that same thing, like this technique really only works fortissimo. And if that's what you want all the time, fine. But then you're stuck up there all the time. Whereas something like this can be way more subtle because it's very easy to do. It's like, and you can target groups of strings instead of just hitting all six. This thing, it's very hard to target like a D chord. You can do this without hitting these guys you don't want, right? Whereas this, I can just hit literally the trebles if I want, or I can do a full D because it has that versatility, in other words, to do that. And so when I started learning how to do it correctly, I realized I wanted to use it. It's natural to want to use it more often in other examples, right? Let me show one more example with this abanico you can practice. This is called verdiales. Method for composing. Oh, sorry, I haven't checked my questions here. What is your method for composing? Okay, all right, yeah, I'll talk about that. So just real quick, again, with the abanico, this is called verdiales. So there's different ways to do this rhythm. It's basically 1 and the 2 and the 3 and 1 and the 2 and the 3. It's like a fandango, but very slow, right? See, this is very comfortable to do with the wrist. If you do this, you see what happens is that I'm not getting my bass notes because I'm resting my thumb. And if you do it without the thumb like this, it just doesn't feel right to do that. So you can use your fingers and a lot of ways you can make the triplet. That'll be the most logical, right? But on a big chord, like an F chord, like you want that bass note, with the wrist, you can get all the 6 strings if you want, or you can make it like bass, and then I'm getting the trebles here, right? And as fast as I can do this, I can do this triplet really nicely. And I've seen people try to, and it's just too much. It's like you're way in the fortissimo, you've got no dynamics to play with there. I'll save that for the end, when I want to have a big punctuation mark at the end of it. Right? So that's a little bit on abanico and how you can apply it to different things, and I think it's just way more versatile. And again, you just approach it like it's this guy, except with this stroke being this one. And you make a triplet, even stroke triplet by doing this. Okay. Yeah, so the question was, what's the method for composing, right? So it depends what you're composing for. Sometimes, like if I have to compose for dance, like a ballet thing, the first thing I just compose mathematically. So I start with how many compases, and that's the first question I ask. And of course, the dancers have to sit there and think about it. 1, 2, 3, and we get up to 9, and I'm like, oh, you could have just, So that's the first concept. And so once you have the math of how long, then you've got something to work with, and then you decide in that moment, do I want to start with something traditional that I already know how to play, that I've learned from the maestros? Typically, I'll go there first, see if that works. If it doesn't work out to that math, then you have to adjust it. And that's where you get into that problem of, if I adjust this thing, if I have to repeat it again, or if I have to repeat it in the middle or something like that, does that affect the musical purpose, the structure of the falsetta or whatever? And in a negative way, right? Because I don't like to do things that don't make sense. It's just, so what I will do instead was abandon that concept. And it might even be my own falsetta, and I get asked all the time, do you have a falsetto for this? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I got the perfect falsetto. And I play it. And they're like, oh, that's great. But now we're going to do, and it's at 100 beats a minute. And then they say, but we're going to do it at 80. And I'm just like, okay, at that tempo, the music is dead, And sometimes the reverse happens, but in the world of dance, it's usually slow stuff. It's very difficult to compose this stuff. And so you just start from scratch and make something that works. So usually that means, I just start with the rhythm of it. What's the feel and the timing and all that stuff. And then, we go, I just kind of make it up, like it could be improvised. So if you're not into creating and improvising on your own, all creation, really, composing, comes first from being able to improvise over some structure, whatever that is. Obviously, that's what jazz is all about. And you don't have to necessarily go there in terms of your discipline concept. A lot of rock players like, I just improvise, I just make up stuff. And what that means is they're just noodling, right? So, but that's what really how basic improvisation is. You're making stuff up, you're kind of noodling around, but you have to have some kind of concept. So in flamenco, if you're going to noodle or whatever, you start with a concept. And usually in guitar, in flamenco guitar, the concept is your chords. And I would say the vast majority of flamenco guitarists are composing falsetas or whatever from the standpoint of chords. And my teacher, Ricardo, showed us that specifically. And it was pretty amazing because he was like, all right, let's do a chord progression. And he just made some weird chord progression that was in a weird key. And it was like, right. And he goes, then let's just do compas. Let's say Solea per Bullier. Right. And he just made up some chords like that. And then he says, so once you have the chords, then you start making something out of it. Like instead of rasgueado, you do like arpeggio. Whatever it was. And he would do arpeggio, and then once the arpeggio was done, then he said, then you try it again with more of a scale. Or right, and then it just kind of evolves from there. So I think in general, that's the typical way things are done. But, if you are an improviser, then you realize what happens to yourself. And goes for everybody that you might study a flamenco, an improviser like a jazz player or something like that. You discover that they have licks, right, that they repeat, and those licks are part of their vocabulary melodically, or maybe they're arpeggios, like something like this I like a lot. Or like, I like that a lot. And so when you're improvising, all of a sudden you find yourself doing stuff like that. Right? So I remember I was messing around with this thing for such a long time. Right? This thing. And it just was like almost like a habitual thing. I kept doing that, whatever it was. And I as much as I was playing that, I finally just took that and turned it into a falsetta. So I just made it like, no, I'm going to just do that exactly the same way every time. But then I'm going to do this chord. I was like, oh yeah, instead of whatever the key of the song is, I can change the chordal concept. And I was like, oh, that's granina. I didn't even know that this could be a granina, right? And I wasn't even thinking of it that way. But that's the point, is that you start with something, and it could be that if it's not your chords in a bigger structure, it's just some little musical device that you like to do that you're comfortable doing all the time. Another one I learned when I was a kid that I use all the time is like this descending fives thing, where I first learned it this way. It was this scale, which is the harmony for your basic pentatonic scale, right? But in this position, if you do a diatonic harmony, I think it's the Japanese have a name for that scale. But regardless of how you think of it, it has this sound of like a C Lydian, right? But you don't have to use it for that. So I realized I could use it on E minor, and then on A minor, it sounds Dorian, right? So that same pattern, the idea was that I was doing that scale with 5 notes: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And coming from pentatonic, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was my idea with that scale. So I find myself reverting to that kind of stuff, just a weird finger pattern, right? And then I had like rondegna, where I use this one a lot. And I didn't realize I'm doing it, because I was like, when you're composing, sometimes you start from that improvisational thing that you're doing that is just natural, like you're not thinking too hard about it. So rondegna, what I just did was tune D and F sharp. Okay, so this is like a D chord, but these are normal. And in my rondegna, I have this kind of thing where I do right. So that little lick is this basic picking pattern lick, which is like 6 notes. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That I practiced when I was a kid. So I don't really, doing this kind of thing. But doing it with my left hand any time of the day is like not thinking about it. I just do it, right? It just comes out. And then later I put in the bass notes. I'm like, it sounds fancy, but all it is the same stupid lick that same lick over and over is all it is. And then I had this thing again. It's the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just with a different tuning. What was this before, with a different tuning, is now in the middle strings, right? But this changes, right? So again, it's just recycling what I tend to, my go-to things with improvisation. And if you really study any musician that deeply, we're like, there was a guy just posted something recently on YouTube. This is amazing 5-hour video of Alan Holdsworth. And I had listened to that guy when I was a kid and everything, and I didn't know what was going on. I don't think I even understood as an adult what he was doing. And this guy broke everything down into some very basic patterns that the guy was doing and pointing out every time he used it, and obviously in different contexts. The same silly little pattern that he would do, like one of them was like that same pattern manifests and sounds completely different and complicated, just because he would put it in a different rhythm or a different context. And and all of a sudden this huge world of complicated music simplifies to just a few little elements that are pretty interesting. But then of course, if all you do is copy somebody else, you need to find, it's okay to copy somebody. It's just that you have to find your own way of doing it if you want to be original. And one thing I want to make very clear is that in flamenco, it's not important to be original in that sense, like rock guitar players think like, oh, that guy's just a ripoff of so-and-so. In flamenco, because the tradition is so important, this goes for the singing and the guitar playing and the dancing, is that everybody is actually unique, like as individuals. And there's enough in the tradition and stuff to learn that you can copy people and still be unique. But you don't want to add such a level of uniqueness that you've totally lost your authenticity for what, you know, the form, what the style needs. It has to be recognizable and kind of accepted by some small majority of the flamenco community, so that what you're doing has validity both artistically in the bigger picture, and, you know, find your unique artist, your own, you know. And so in the end, this is all taste based kind of things. So anyway, like my piece of music, so I start basically with these chords, which is basically a C sharp and F sharp minor. So I think of those kind of chord shapes, and this is a different way to play an F sharp minor, obviously, you know, than what we're used to, right? This, or an inverted version. So I'm using an open A, minor, 7. So I have those ideas, but what I'm really doing is how I'm playing the music is the right hand, which is an arpeggio right now. And this right hand is something I learned from Ricardo Nunez, who has this kind of, right? He has a piece where it's all right hand arpeggio. There's almost no rasgueados, yet he's expressing this polillas so clearly and strongly with melody. And I was very inspired by that when I was in Spain, because I had not really noticed that kind of thing as much in like the other guitar players I followed, like Paco de Lucia or people like that. So this idea of using the right hand arpeggio to express the compás was really interesting to me. So I learned a lot of those patterns. So basically I'm doing like up and down arpeggio here, but the idea is coming, if you listen to that piece, Trafalgar is called, you can hear those kind of patterns I'm doing. So basically arpeggio is expressing the rhythm. And then up here, same idea. This is a right hand arpeggio, you know, just keeping the rhythm with that. And from that, my chords you start to hear melody in there, and you want to bring out that melody, whatever it is, you know, along the way. That's one example. Another one I got from Gerardo also was, he has this falsetto that he taught us that has this conclusion where you use the muted stroke. And I had the idea of, like, well, if I transpose that to here, well, when you get to the open strings, you know, they're not in the same when you pull open. But if you do it up here, so it actually sounds totally different, just because I'm letting those open strings, which are still in the key, you know, operate. But it's literally the same falsetta. I just move it up into a different key, right? So some little ideas like that. And let's see, 8-minute countdown. Oh, okay, sorry. Link. Oh, okay. Cool. So anyway, I guess we're out of time. So thank you guys for listening in, watching. And if you want to do Skype class or anything like that, you can sign up through my website. Just give me some advance notice if you want to do a Skype class. I have a lot of people sign up the same day, and I'm like, I'm out and about doing stuff, doing gigs, and my schedule's all over the place. So while the calendar looks open, there's sometimes I have to adjust for that. So if you pick a time that we can't do, if you give me a couple days, then we can work out maybe a better time. And so just reschedule it on email or something like that. Okay. So thank you guys. I'm going to end the stream. Ciao.